Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well out there. I know I'm a little bit delayed on getting out our solution video, but I appreciate your patience. So for this week, we're going to be going through the solution for Workout Wednesday 2020 Week 11, Can You Build Smart Ranked Lists? Now, a little bit of an introduction on this. This came from a real ask that I did at work where we were trying to figure out certain days of the week and compare them to peers or those that were similar in terms of where they were in time. But if you can imagine, today is Sunday. We want to compare this Sunday to the previous X number of Sundays. And the goal was to see what that performance was stacked up against his peers. We wanted to be able to communicate that very quickly out loud and see visually in a list or a table what that looked like. So here's what the final challenge looks like. You can see that we've got basically the same visualization repeated 3 times, one for sales, one for the number of orders, and one for the quantity. So when I go through this solution video, we'll focus on sales just to make it a little bit easier for you. Dissecting the challenge a little bit, you can see that there's some coloring going on. So the best performer for sales is at the top, and it is also in a dark green. Then those above average, which are labeled here, are in a lighter green. Our target week, which is the one we've chosen here, it's May 8th, 2019, is delineated with this little icon. Those below average appear in a gray, and below are yellow, with the worst performer being in red. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into Tableau Desktop and check everything out. So again, here's the visualization. There are 3 metrics, like I just said: the sum of sales representing sales, the distinct count of order IDs, which is representing orders, and the sum of quantity, which is representing quantity. For this challenge, for the solution video, we're going to focus on sales since that's probably the easiest. So when you look at the final workbook solution, there's a couple steps, so I'm going to break them down in order of how I went about them. The first one is building out a target parameter. So that's pretty simple, and that's where I began this. Let's just create a parameter where we can input a date and put that in there. And what this is going to do when you look at the final visualization, that's going to infer the rest of this, which is we choose a target date, we then know what day of week it is, and then we know how many weeks we're going to look back. Worth noting, I think this is a little bit of semantic language, and I wasn't actually sure where I fell on this, as well as do we say the prior 12 or the prior 11. When you look at the total number here, there's 12 total. So if we were being inclusive this Wednesday and the including 11, so the total 12 prior, you may be able to do that, or you may feel more comfortable saying 11 prior. It doesn't really matter for the sake of this. You're free to use whichever language you prefer to be accurate there. Okay, so step 1, like I said, is to build out this parameter. Now the next thing to do is we want to know what day of week it is. So that's where we're going to build out this calculation, which is purely taking the weekday of our target date, our selected parameter date, and returning it. So this will return a number between 1 and 7, depending on the day of the week and how you start your weeks. I've not defined them to start any differently, so weeks are starting on Sunday in our scenario. So that's all that this does. It says, tell me what the weekday is of our parameter as an integer. And then what we're going to do is we're actually, and those of you that have watched a lot of my solutions, I like to use a lot of Boolean calculations when it comes to dates. So we use that we create a Boolean calculation to then isolate the day of the week. So let's say it's the 4th day of the week. So if this is a 4, we want to make sure that the order dates that we show are also the 4th day of the week. Okay, so that's step 1, and that goes on to your filter shelf up here, and you're going to use that across your entire set, across all of your challenge this week. The next thing we want to do is isolate out the number of weeks. Now you could build this as a parameter. I chose to not build it as a parameter in this particular case, but that's okay. It doesn't, if you wanted it to be a parameter, the main thing you would change would be this integer right here, which is locked at 12. You could adjust it. So to isolate the number of weeks we want to choose with our target, we're just going to take the difference in weeks. So you can see that I have truncated both our parameter date and our order date to the week, and then we're taking the date difference in weeks to that. That might be a little bit of overkill on the calculation, but from my perspective, it never hurts, especially if someone else is picking up your work, to see what they're doing. Okay, I see. We're rolling each date to the week, and then we're actually calculating the week's difference between them. The absolute value is just there to avoid having to worry about which date should come first, if it's the order date or the parameter date, the real date or the parameter date. And then the same thing on the other side. We're basically saying, okay, we want to go up to the current target date week, but we don't want to go past it. So that is our final situation there. And that will again go back onto your filter shelf and will be evaluated to true. Now I'm going to go ahead and build another sheet, and let's just bring those on so that we can show what they look like. And let me actually start with first bringing our order date on. I'm going to right click drag, bring it on as discrete. So there's all of our order dates. First, let's go ahead and do the same day of the week, and let's isolate out our days a little bit more clearly. So there's that, and then the same thing with the weeks back. Let's go ahead and do that as well. And now you can see we have that nice list going. The first step here is to just drag sum of sales onto text. That begins our entire visualization of what we're going to end up with. The rest of it are a lot of calculations on top of it from a formatting perspective. So if you thought about what our end goal was, we could just sort our table, and this is a part of it, is if we sort it in descending order by sum of sales. And let me just keep myself honest here, and if we were to toggle between them, let me unhide this one for you. We'll see that it's exactly the same list in exactly the same order. So there's really just a lot of formatting that we're putting on top of it to help kind of communicate the message more clearly, make it a little bit jazzier, and really draw insight to what is really just a table, a list of numbers. I can imagine this being a good scenario if you have a stakeholder or an audience member that needs to know the nitty-gritty number, but you're trying to share some of the variability in terms of the numbers, or you're trying to get a sense of spread to them when they just really want to know the exact number. Okay, so here's where our table starts. We've got our filters in place. So the next thing to do is probably to work on the colors here. So you can see there's some sophisticated stuff going on. I think I said it already, just the max and the min are colored differently, and then the above average and the below average are colored differently as well. So I'm going to walk you through the calculation for that because it's a little bit long. I'm probably not going to type it accurately, and it'd be easier for me to explain it. So here's what it looks like. It is basically using table calculations. So table calculations in this scenario are going to be your best friend. I'm using window max, window min, and window average. So if I were to read this out loud and evaluate this to you, I'm going to say if the sum of sales for our target week, or not our target week, if the sum of sales for the week in the table is equal to the window max sum of sales, so it's equal to the max, then we want to give it a 4. If it's equal to the min, we want to give it a 1. If it's above average, we'll give it a 3. And if it's below average, we're going to give it a 2. Now, I chose to do these as integers so that I could use a continuous color palette. I think it's a traffic light color palette. We'll go into that whenever we did that. You don't necessarily have to do it, but the reason I chose to do them as integers is so that when we get to our final product, we can have that filled square mark showing up, and that will only happen if we have a continuous measure, or a continuous field would probably be more accurate on color. So if you thought about this, we're basically saying 4 is dark green, 1 is that sort of red-orange color, 3 is light green, and 2 is that yellowish orange color. Now I'm going to drag this onto color. Let's see what happens here. And you'll see a couple things right off the bat. So it's going 1 to 4. Let me go ahead and change my mark type to a square so it gets a little bit more clear. And this is already very similar to what we had. We've got, one gradient that's getting light to dark, but it is, separating out everything how it should be. Now this is a fairly simple table, so Tableau actually did a great job of figuring out how it should be addressing this data. But you could always look and see, and it's table down, which means I'm going to look at all of the dates and I'm going to compare them to each other, and I'm going to find out which one is the window max, the window min, and when I'm evaluating the window average, I'm going to take that collection of numbers and then I'm going to find the average from those. Now you could get more sophisticated with your table calcs if you have more headers, but this is perfect for our scenario. Okay. So we've got our table, it is square marks, we've got our numbers on there. So all we need to do now is we need to come in and we need to adjust our colors. And again, I think I used, maybe it was the red, green, gold diverging. I honestly can't remember at this point. That doesn't look like it's accurate. I think it was temperature. I should have known. Okay, so all I'm doing is I'm setting the steps to 4 colors. You can see that it's reverse of what we want, so we'll just reverse it. And now we have exactly the same set here. And that's another good thing about this continuous measure that we've calculated and we've defined where the numbers are going to be. We're basically putting gates in along the way. This concept can be helpful if you're trying to come up with sort of unique milestone or gates for coloring with your calculations and they aren't necessarily even, or you're wanting to use something external. Once you define what it's going to relate to from an integer perspective, you can build out the color ramp or color palette appropriately. Okay, so we're really tracking along quite quickly here. We've got a big portion of it built. If we look back at our original, there's probably 2 more steps that we need to go through. The first one being, let's actually start with this above average header and below average header because it's a direct repeat, except a little bit more simplified of some of the other logic. So in this scenario, we're using that same calculation from before. For some reason, when I did this originally, I switched them, but they're equivalent, right? So is the sum of sales above, greater than or equal to the window average, then we're going to say it's above average. If it's not and it's below, then we're going to call it below average. And so we can go ahead and drag that on to the left. Doesn't change anything. Our table calculation is still going table down, which is perfect. And now we have those headers. And so we can just simply rotate them and we can hide that field label and make this a little bit bigger. Obviously, when you are doing the formatting for this, there'll be some finishing steps there. So we're really ticking along. We're pretty close to the final results. The next thing we want to do is build on that target marker. So how I would do this is first we're going to build out what I have called the date mark, which is it's dead simple. It's if the order date equals the parameter date, then we're going to use this little caret here, this right caret. Otherwise, it's going to be nothing. So let me go ahead and drag that onto our view. And there you go. You can see exactly where it is. And that's perfect, right? The big thing we've got going on right now is some formatting issues where we've got extra borders that we don't necessarily need as part of the process. And then let's go ahead and just start with the shading because I think that this is probably going to be why I did some of what I did. Oh, no, maybe not. Okay. So I went ahead and adjusted the shading because when we look at the final result, we really have our mark pointed at a specific spot and then we have everything above or below average. Right now, nothing is sorted inside of these. You can see that that's why they're off, but we can go ahead and get those sorted. So let me go ahead and you'll see that because this is sort of nested inside that when we're sorting, it's not sorting exactly how we want it to sort. So I think that that's why I actually made a date copy, which is purely just a copy of the date, and brought it on as a discrete value so that we could then sort ahead of that mark the date again. And I will go ahead and clear the sort on this one, and we will sort this one in descending order by the sum of sales. There we go. And again, you'll probably have to come in and adjust your shading since I've now change the levels again. There you go. And we can just hide this extra header there. So again, we've got exactly what we need now. They are sorted numerically how we would interpret it to be. So again, just to kind of reiterate, we've put another copy of the date on there so that we could have our sorting and we didn't have the date mark sort of take over the field. If you thought about it, we've got basically our date, we've got our date showing, then we've got the mark, then we've got our date sort of repeated, however you want to do that. Okay. So this is near to completion. The trickiest thing I did at the very, very end was right up here. It's this title. So not only do we want to point out what our target date is, we want to tell you where it ranks. Now, I will also say there's been a lot of commentary around this challenge on should those that are identical be ranked identical or should it be a sort of a forced unique rank. I am using index right now, and that's fine for me. You can, obviously this is an example analysis and you're free to do whatever you think is the most appropriate for your audience members. For the sake of the challenge, I've chosen to use index to rank them. So yes, if they were identical, which doesn't look like we have one right now, but I think when you got to maybe quantity or orders, there was some numbers that were more near identical. It may be more appropriate to have them either be tied rank or ranked unique or do something different. And I guess I should kind of backtrack and say, if you were to rank them uniquely, that would be the same as index where they would be in descending order by sum of sales once we define that index, and then revert to alphabetical by the date, or chronology by the dates. So you're free to work through that. I tend to use the index table calculation a lot when I'm doing ranking. I find it to be faster and more intuitive than building out the rank calculations, but I'm sure there's good reasons to do both. One of the reasons I tend to lean on index is because we can define the sort within it. I know you can obviously with rank as well, but it is exactly the same as your table calculation helper numbers that come up in those brackets. So if you're ever trying to figure out how a table calculation is addressing, a lot of times you can swap that with index to see, what's actually happening. And so that's going to be our final step. Maybe as a starting point, I will just type index and put it on the marks card, and let's just see what's happening. So right now you can see the index along table down. It's exactly perfect. We've got our 12 marks. They are all ranked, but you could always come in and you can edit it. And this is what I mean by you can set the sort specific dimensions inside of this table calculation. Let me go ahead and undo just so we don't have that modified. So all we want to do is we want to put that piece of information in the header. So right now, if I were to just click on my title and I were to put the index in there, well, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to say it's all of them, right? And that's one of the cool things about titles is they do some aggregation and you have some enumeration when they're in the titles, but we really only want the number 3 to be in there. So all we need to do is create a calculated field, and I actually have one, but let's build it again. And it's going to be if the order date equals the parameter date, then the index. And we'll go ahead and end. And Tableau is going to yell. That's why I hesitated, because this needs to be aggregated. Table calculations are already aggregated. This is not aggregated. So here we can put in the attribute function. You could probably put in min or max, whatever you felt comfortable with, because what this is going to do is it's going to evaluate your mark. It's going to evaluate your order date with whatever it looks like. We're in a good situation here because the min and the max, the attribute, they're all the same. They're going to return a value to us. And it's going to say, okay, if they're equivalent, then show me the index. Otherwise, it's going to be a null. So let me just drag that on, and let's see if I can actually just replace that on there. Of course, Tableau isn't happy with that because it broke it, but let me go ahead and pop it on there. And there you have it. We've got our index, our rank, whatever you want to call it, as 3 at the top. And that's really the last step that is put in place to define what this challenge is. There's one last thing I guess I could go through, and that is actually these little stylistic elements. So probably the fun thing about this challenge from a formatting perspective, if you made it to the end, was that there were these little underlines underneath each of the sheets. This was done using containers. So we've got our sheet. If I double click, I've got a container. Let me just show you the layout of it. So this container actually has a background that is set to gray, and then it's got some inner padding, and that inner padding is really what's defining what that color should be. So you can get a nice, cool, sort of modern effect, add some depth. I think that this made the tables look a little bit more robust than they would have without anything on the bottom. Just a little bit more special. That's something easy to do, and I've been doing that a lot. It makes them almost look like little cards as opposed to just little sheets by themselves. So that was the last kind of finishing step for this visualization. This is just a little floating container with a show hide button that I have adjusted to be a calendar icon, a date picker. I did make that date picker icon available in the blog. You are free to use it for any additional analysis. That is my gift to you. And that wraps up our challenge. I hope you enjoyed it.